couple of short readings this morning. The first comes from Romans chapter 12, verses 12 through 13. If you follow in the Pew Bibles, it's on page 1764. That's Romans 12, 12 and 13. And we read, "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, share with God's people who are in need, practice hospitality." The second reading is just one verse. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Again, Pew Bibles, page 1878. Hebrews 13, verse 2. "Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing, some people have entertained angels without knowing it." And now it's Cody's.
Good morning. I like my routines. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I'm a bit of a creature of habit. I like routine because it's predictable and it's comfortable, and I don't usually like unexpected change. I mean, there are the exceptions, like if, I'm planning to spend a day at home and suddenly you tell me you're going to take me to an amusement park or something. Sure, I like that change. But I don't usually like unexpected change. When there are unexpected changes, or the plans that I have don't work out, or maybe even if I just feel inconvenienced by something, my tendency is to get really upset or grumpy and make sure everybody knows it. Particularly my lovely, patient wife. I'm probably not alone in this, but I will often pray that God gives me opportunities to meet my neighbors and to build relationships. Now, you're probably not surprised, but there are a few nights each week where I get home kind of late. Sometimes when I get home, my neighbors are outside talking to each other or playing with their puppies in the front yard. Seems like God answering prayer, right? Like, what better excuse is there to go over and meet someone than a puppy, right? Everybody would go over. The only problem is that usually on that car ride home, after being out all day, I am really looking forward to going in my house, sitting on the couch, my wife and kids are in bed, and just shutting down. Just shutting my mind off. Why does God arrange those sorts of moments when I would much rather be doing something else? I mean, I know God sets these things up, but He could set it up at a different time, right? Or sometimes I feel the Holy Spirit encouraging me to invite a person over or to make plans with someone. The problem is, it is almost always when I just want my own space, or to be alone, or maybe just to be with my wife and kids. It feels inconvenient, and it messes with my plans. God's plans mess with my plans. Why can't He tell me to do these things when I actually feel like it? Well, part of the answer is probably that I'll never actually feel like it. Because in writing this lesson, I had to examine myself, and I came to a really hard realization. I am not the most hospitable person out there. My wife is more hospitable than me. I can be hospitable. I can fake it pretty well. But only when it's convenient for me, or only when it's easy and doesn't require a lot of effort. And the truth is, I think most people think that they're hospitable, but might not be. And I think most churches think they're hospitable, but might not be. I think part of that comes from poorly defining hospitality. People will think of hospitality as just, we're welcoming, we're kind, we're loving. Very general terms, when most aren't even those things. I think we all need a wake-up call. Hospitality requires action. It's not just a feeling, for one thing. But the Western world and the Western church is not good at hospitality. Let me tell you a story of a church I know. They were looking for a guest speaker one Sunday, and they did end up finding one. This guest speaker was about 2 hours away, and he was more than willing to come and give a lesson. He was quite excited, actually. So he drove the 2 hours, and he gave a very good talk. Some people said a few words to him, before the sermon, and for like a minute afterwards. And the leadership gave him some money, which really only amounted to gas money in the end, because of how far he'd driven. And then everybody just left. He was left standing there alone with the preacher. No one invited him to their home for a visit. No one asked him out for lunch. Basically, he was expected to just turn around and drive 2 hours home after driving 2 hours there to speak for 20 to 30 minutes. Now, what would you say to that church? Anyone?
It's typical.
Yeah? Is it good? Is it hospitable?
It's here.
What would you say if I said it was this church?
Happened in June.
Yeah. Happened just a month or two ago when Emmanuel came from Strathmore. Now, I don't say this to beat up on anybody, only to point out that all of us, myself included, need a reality check. We need to understand what real hospitality is, and to be honest with ourselves in admitting that a lot of us, again, myself included, are not very good at it.
Amen.
So let's look at what the Bible has to say about hospitality. Now, Don already read some of this for us, but we're going to look at Romans chapter 12, verses 12 through 13. Now, this is part of a section from verses 9 to 21, where Paul is talking about the marks of a true Christian. He says, "Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, and seek to show hospitality." One of the marks of a true Christian is that they seek to show hospitality. Now let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 2 through 3, where he's talking about the requirements for elders. He says overseers, but it's the same thing. "Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, but not a lover of money." One of the requirements of the leaders of the church is that they be hospitable. Now, part of being a leader of the church, being an elder, is that they are an example for the rest of the church to follow. That means the elders are meant to be hospitable. And for the record, I think they do a pretty good job. But that's an example for the rest of us to follow. They are an example of what a true Christ follower does. And that is be hospitable. Now we're going to look again at Hebrews 13:2, which Don read for us as well. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Now there's a good chance he's referring to some examples in the Old Testament like Abraham and Lot. But it was for the New Testament church and for us as well. We are commanded to show hospitality. I don't see anywhere in there, and if you want to. So it's clear that Christians are meant to be hospitable. But what was biblical hospitality? Well, I think that requires going back to the ancient world, to Old Testament and New Testament times. In the ancient Near East, hospitality was considered a sacred duty. Whether you lived in a one-room tent, a one-room home, or a mansion, hospitality was a sacred duty of every person. Guests were seen as being sent by God. I think Abraham actually reflects that attitude in Genesis 18:2-7. I'm going to read that, and I want you to pay attention to Abraham's behavior. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves. And after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, do as you have said. And Abraham went quickly into the tent of Sarah and said, quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Now, Abraham didn't know that these were angels, that these were messengers sent by God, but he really seems to have a sense of urgency. He runs, which, remember, Jewish men, they didn't do. He runs. He's full of urgency. It seems pretty clear that he holds to the common belief that regardless of their identity, these strangers are people sent by God. Now, who could receive hospitality in the ancient world? The truth is, anybody. Hospitality was always welcome to friends, and it was also always welcome to strangers. There's actually a proverb from the ancient world that says, every stranger is an invited guest. And it goes even farther than that, because enemies were welcome to experience hospitality. Now, there were certain conditions, but sometimes enemies were received as guests. And as long as they were there, they were perfectly safe, and they were treated as if they were a friend. Let's talk about some of the requirements of hospitality in the ancient world. Now, the first few categories I would call welcoming your guest. They would bow to each other, and there would be a formal greeting where the host would say, peace be on you. And the guest would say, and peace on you. And then they would kiss each other on their cheeks, getting very close, obviously, and just welcoming this guest in. And then there would be removal of the shoes and the washing of the guest's feet. A guest was always offered water for washing their feet. And a servant would usually do the washing, scrubbing and drying and all of that. Feet that are probably covered in dirt and animal feces, and just, it wasn't pleasant. So it was a common aspect of hospitality to offer someone water to wash their feet. And then it was also common to anoint your guests with oil. Usually olive oil. Now, this should make us think about the story where Jesus rebuked a religious leader for not anointing him with oil when he goes in Luke 7:46. That's because they violated the common practices of hospitality. The removing of shoes, the washing of feet, the anointing with oil, I would say, is taking care of your guest. Next, we have, I guess, a category of practices that were all based around meeting the needs of your guest. Guests were given a drink of water. Giving a drink of water was recognizing someone as worthy of a peaceful reception. And it was essentially a pledge of friendship, at least as long as they were there. And then they were always served a meal. In the ancient world, and in the East today even, sharing food was viewed as a very special act of hospitality. It was a way of even making a covenant and of peace and fidelity. Often we see in the Old Testament, when covenants are made between people, they would share a meal. Dr. Thompson, a Syrian missionary, was once a guest in a Bedouin sheikh's tent. The host dipped a bit of bread in some grape molasses and gave it to the missionary for him to eat. Then he said to him, "We are now brethren. There is bread and salt between us. We are brothers and allies." And then the guest was basically made lord of the house, figuratively speaking. There was an Eastern proverb that says, "The guest while in the house is its lord." And the host would consider himself a servant at his guest's need. And then hospitality required protection of that guest. When a host accepted a man to be his guest, he agreed to defend that guest against all possible enemies. Remember Lot and Sodom? Offering up his own children to protect his guests. There's an American missionary in the East who was named Cyrus Hamlin. He was once entertained by a governor, and the host took a piece of roast mutton and handed it to the missionary, saying, as he did so, "Now do you know what I have done?" And in answering his own question, he went on to say, "By that act, I have pledged you every drop of my blood, that while you are in my territory, no evil shall come to you. For that space of time, we are brothers." Now, when the New Testament church was told to be hospitable, this is what they would have had in mind. Now, the word that Paul uses for hospitality means literally love to strangers. But based on culture, we can see that it clearly extends beyond strangers. It was friends, strangers, and even enemies who were welcome to have hospitality. To summarize, hospitality meant welcoming people into your home and into your life. It meant taking care of them and meeting their needs and protecting them from harm. That was how you showed hospitality. That was how you showed love to strangers. The command to love and show hospitality are intimately connected in the New Testament. In Romans 12, 9 through 13, which we saw part of earlier, when Paul says to be hospitable, it's in a section where he talks extensively about love. And in Hebrews 13, 1 to 2, when he talks about being hospitable, it is immediately following a command to let brotherly love continue. And in 1 Peter 4, 8 through 9, people are told to show hospitality to one another without grumbling, after being told that love covers a multitude of sins. They are intimately connected. You loved by showing hospitality. Obviously, there's more ways to show love, but this is one of them. And hospitality was so important to the first century church. There were itinerant preachers, traveling missionaries. They depended on the hospitality of other Christians. Christians fleeing persecution needed the hospitality of the church. And then, according to the author of Hebrews, there is always the possibility that you might be entertaining an angel. So now I think we know a little bit about what hospitality in Bible times looked like. It looked like welcoming people into your homes and lives, as I said, taking care of them and meeting their needs and protecting them from harm. But how does it look today? Because it's a different world now, right? People's needs are different, aren't they? Well, I think there are still some similarities, some broad categories that are the same. And they're going to sound familiar. Hospitality today still means welcoming people in, whether that be into your home or into your life. Taking care of them when you can. Meeting their needs and protecting them. Hospitality requires action. Now, there are some things I want you to remember when we talk about hospitality. All Christians are called to practice hospitality in their homes. It's not the only way to practice hospitality, but it is the most basic way. And it is how the New Testament church would have understood it. Hospitality is broader than that, but that's like the foundation. Knowing your personality and your own sensitivities does not excuse you from practicing hospitality. It just means you might need to prepare for it differently than other people. Something else to remember, hospitality is not always convenient. I mean, in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament sometimes, people lived in tents. One-room tents. When Abraham invited those 3 men in, it was a one-room tent, likely. You would eat together and sleep together in the same room if your guests stayed overnight. That is not convenient. And it was done any time someone showed up. And it was even done for your enemies. That is not convenient. I also want you to remember that hospitality is not entertainment. Entertaining requires significant preparation. You know, you make the house spotless, you vacuum all the cat hair, the dog hair, whatever, clean up the kids' toys, pull out the best dishes, make sure the kids are bathed and clean, greet people at the door, take their coats, have an amazing, 4-course meal. That's entertaining. Hospitality is not entertaining. Hospitality aims to always be ready to receive people. Not perfect, but ready. It requires a lot more vulnerability. It lets people see your dirty laundry, figuratively and, unfortunately, sometimes literally. Hospitality grants what some people would call refrigerator rights. You come in my door, help yourself to any food you find in the fridge, unless it's gone bad. Nothing fancy. Hospitality means that your lives are open to being shared with other people. Now, there's an author, a woman named Rosaria Butterfield, who wrote a book called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. And in this, she refers to biblical hospitality in the modern age as radically ordinary hospitality. Now, those who practice radically ordinary hospitality today see strangers as neighbors and neighbors as the family of God, and they aim to make that a reality every day. They see their homes not as their own, but as God's gift to them to use specifically for furthering His kingdom. The gospel, quite literally, can come with a house key. People practicing this radically ordinary hospitality view their homes as hospitals and incubators. Now let me explain that. A place to help people heal, and a place to help ideas, particularly the idea of Jesus and all of His claims being true, to take root. These people work hard to know their neighbors and to know how they struggle. This requires praying constantly. People who practice radically ordinary hospitality today are not embarrassed to be friends with people who are different, who are unpresentable, or even unpleasant to be around. These people provide time necessary to build relationships with people who think differently and to build strong relationships within the family of God. They are not concerned with politics, culture, or where someone stands on current events. They create intimacy among people that allows genuine differences to be discussed in a friendly manner. They are fearless givers, knowing that God will provide. People practicing hospitality today care about the things their neighbors care about, the important things. They look after the elderly, and they include children and value their concerns. Now I'm going to close with 4 practical suggestions to help us all do better. First, respect the reality of your neighbors' lives and households. Remember that acceptance is not approval, and resist the lie that love and approval go hand in hand. You can love and accept someone without approving of the way they live. But non-Christian neighbors, as well as Christians, need to experience genuine acceptance from us. They need to feel welcomed and accepted for who they are. Second, pray that you will be a safe person to hear the burdens of your neighbors' hearts. Are you able, through God's grace, to put a guard on your mouth and say little when they're sharing with you? Or do we always have to say everything there is on a topic? I struggle with that sometimes, if I'm going to be honest. I see some people nodding. When people are willing to stop and tell us where they're hurting, we need to praise God for it, and we need to stop what we're doing, we need to shut our mouths, and we need to listen with care. Third, know why it matters that we are all made in God's image. It matters because it means everyone is inherently valuable. Everyone has worth and deserves love and acceptance. Finally, start somewhere and start today. Start at the end of your driveway. Go to the end of your driveway and say hi to someone passing by. Invite someone from church home. I see people shaking their heads. If you live out in the country like some people, that's hard. I get that. Invite someone from the church over once a month. You don't have to start big. You can start small. Don't rush home after service. Stay and talk to people you don't normally talk to. Show some interest in their lives. Become intentional with your neighbors. Decide to have a barbecue and invite a neighbor or two over. Say, hey, I just want to get to know you. In the winter, you see someone shoveling snow. Go over and help. Take your snowblower, take your shovel, whatever. Rake leaves. Give away meals. Give away time. Share your house. Give away things you don't need. Even cars if you can afford it. Just start somewhere. Now, I do have to give a little bit of a caution. Some spouses might be a little further ahead in this than others. And you want to make sure that you go at the pace of the one who is farther behind. For example, I might have a huge drive to invite people over all the time, which I don't, but let's say I do. And my wife, watching 2 children, is exhausted and does not have the energy for that. She might have energy for once a week or once every couple weeks. I respect that, and I go at her pace, and we slowly build up more and more. Just imagine what the world would be like if every Christian practiced hospitality. Imagine a world where you all know the names of your neighbors and you spend time together, sharing meals, playing games, just hanging out. Imagine a church where everyone was always welcome in each other's homes, and they all know it and practice it. Christians and their homes would be such a safe place for people to be welcomed, to learn about Jesus, to grow, to hurt, and to heal. Hospitality is required of all Christians. Biblical hospitality welcomes people in to your lives and sometimes your homes, often your homes, but specifically your lives. It takes care of them and it meets their needs. If someone comes over and they're hungry or they're wearing ragged clothes, hospitality means feeding them, maybe giving them some clothes you don't need, things like that. Or if they're hurting and just need someone to talk to, listening to them. And it means protecting them sometimes from ourselves and the things we might want to say, protecting them from the hurt and from the enemy. By being a place where they can learn about Jesus and be safe and comfortable and heal. Let me repeat that. Hospitality means welcoming people in, taking care of them, meeting their needs, and protecting them. And finally, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares.